not mindfulness. The most popular form of meditation in the world is called mindfulness. According to CDC data, about 14% of American adults, roughly 36 million people, practice some form of it. It is taught in hospitals, in schools, in corporate offices, in therapy rooms, and the man who introduced it to Western medicine in 1979 knew exactly what he was doing. Tonight, what he took it from, what he kept, and what, by necessity, he left behind. If you have ever been told to just notice, without judgment, without agenda, without trying to change anything, you have been practicing the modern version. Tonight, the original, the Buddha called the original the direct path. Not a path among many, the road that runs straight to the goal. By the end of this, you will understand what that practice actually was, and why direct is the right word. Chapter 1. To understand what was set aside, we have to begin with what was built and how and by whom. In 1979, a man named Jon Kabat-Zinn founded a small program at the University of Massachusetts Medical School. He called it the Stress Reduction Clinic. The patients who came to him were people for whom conventional medicine had run out of options, chronic pain that did not respond to surgery, anxiety that did not resolve in talk therapy, illness that medicine could manage but not cure. The program he designed for them was 8 weeks long. He called it Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR. He did not invent the practice he taught. He had been practicing it himself for more than a decade. He had trained in Zen with two of the most influential teachers of the 20th century, Philip Kapleau in Rochester and Shung San, the Korean Zen master. He had sat with Thich Nhat Hanh. He had practiced vipassanā at the Insight Meditation Society in Massachusetts with Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield. He had studied yoga. He had read deeply in Advaita Vedanta. He was not a casual meditator translating something he half understood. He was a serious practitioner who knew exactly what tradition he was drawing from. He also knew that if he carried that tradition through the doors of a medical school in 1979 with its language intact, talk of liberation, of dharma, of awakening, of suffering as a metaphysical condition, it would not survive contact with the institution. Not because the institution was hostile, because it had no place to put it, so he made a decision. In an interview years later, he described that decision in his own words. I bent over backwards to structure it and find ways to speak about it that avoided as much as possible the risk of its being seen as Buddhist, New Age, Eastern mysticism, or just plain flaky. That sentence is worth slowing down for. He was not hiding what he was doing from himself. He was making a translation choice. What could be preserved? What had to be set aside? What kind of language would let the practice cross into a context where the original language could not go? He acknowledged this directly when he wrote his definition of mindfulness, the awareness that arises through paying attention, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. He was explicit that this was, in his own term, operational. It was what could be measured. It was, he said, leaving out some aspects. That phrase, leaving out some aspects, is the key to the entire history. It is the difference between concealment and translation. Concealment hides what it cannot use. Translation acknowledges what it had to leave behind. Kabat-Zinn was translating. He said so. The popular culture that took his program and ran with it has not always preserved the same precision. Notice too what is built into the definition. On purpose, non-judgmentally. Both of those phrases were deliberate. Non-judgmental because in a clinical population, the inner critic is often part of the illness itself. Patients judge themselves for being in pain, for being anxious, for being depressed. The instruction not to judge is again a clinical decision. It is what those patients need. The definition is not a description of an ancient teaching. It is a specification for a working tool. We will come to what the definition leaves out in a moment. First, what was built, what MBSR preserved, is clear in its architecture. Present moment attention, non-judgmental observation, a practice called the body scan, sustained attention moving slowly through the body from head to foot, which is directly derived from the first foundation of the canonical practice, awareness of the breath, and a structural commitment to daily practice, which honors the original tradition's insistence that this is not something you understand intellectually. It is something you do. The structure of the program itself is concrete and modest. Each week, participants meet as a group for 2 to 3 hours. They learn the body scan. They learn to sit and follow the breath. They learn a sequence of gentle yoga. Between meetings, they practice at home every day for about 45 minutes. By the end of 8 weeks, a working adult has done roughly 45 hours of formal meditation. It is not a contemplative retreat. It is something an ordinary life can sustain, which was always the design. What MBSR transformed or set aside takes longer to name. The original practice has 4 objects of contemplation: body, feelings, mind states, and what the texts call mental qualities. MBSR flattens this largely to the body and to present moment awareness in general. The original practice carries a specific quality of effort, what the texts call atap, ardent, which describes effort directed toward a particular goal. MBSR replaces this with what its teachers call non-striving, the deliberate cultivation of an attitude that does not push, does not aim, does not try to make any particular experience happen. That is not laziness. It is a clinical decision. Patients in chronic pain who are constantly trying to feel better tend to tighten around the pain. The instruction to stop trying, to simply notice, gives them a way to loosen that grip. For their condition, it works. The original practice has an explicit purpose: liberation from the cycle of suffering. MBSR has a purpose too, but it is a different one: the reduction of stress, the improvement of well-being, the better management of clinical symptoms. Both are real purposes. They are not the same purpose. The original practice contemplates impermanence and the absence of a fixed self as the direct engine of insight. MBSR does not. The original practice describes a sequence by which the awareness of feeling, pleasant, painful, neither, can be used to interrupt the automatic emergence of craving before craving becomes suffering. MBSR does not include this sequence in any explicit way. The original practice includes contemplations of the body as a corpse, a deliberately confrontational reflection on death and decay. MBSR, for clinical reasons, does not. We will look at all of these. The point for now is not that MBSR is incomplete. The point is that it was built to be a specific tool for a specific context, and for that purpose, it is very good. Consider the evidence. In 2022, the journal JAMA Psychiatry published a trial that gave MBSR its strongest credential in clinical medicine. The trial enrolled 208 adults with anxiety disorders. Half were randomly assigned to an 8-week MBSR program. The other half received escitalopram, a first-line SSRI, one of the most commonly prescribed medications for anxiety in the world. After 8 weeks, the 2 groups were compared against each other. MBSR was non-inferior to the medication, equally effective on the measure, and on tolerability. The side effect burden patients reported, MBSR did better, About 15% of the meditation group reported adverse events. In the medication group, almost 79% did. That is real-world clinical evidence that this practice does something measurable in a population it was designed for against the standard of care. Earlier, in the year 2000, a trial led by John Teasdale and his colleagues at Oxford and Cambridge had shown something else. 3 researchers, Zindel Siegel, Mark Williams, and Teasdale himself, had extended Kabat-Zinn's work into a program designed specifically for the prevention of depressive relapse. They called it Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, MBCT. For patients with a history of 3 or more episodes of depression, an 8-week course reduced the risk of relapse by roughly 43%. This finding is population-specific. It does not work as well or at all in patients with fewer prior episodes. But for the people it does work for, it appears to be genuinely protective. So far, the evidence supports the practice. The clinical case is strong. It is also worth noticing what almost everything we just said is about. It is about psychology. It is about behavior. It is about symptom management. The strongest claim that mindfulness has carried in the public imagination, that 8 weeks of meditation visibly change your brain structure, has not held up in larger, better controlled studies. In 2022, a research team led by Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, one of the neuroscientists who pioneered this entire field of inquiry, published a paper in the journal Science Advances. 2 randomized controlled trials, 218 participants, 8 weeks of MBSR, careful measurement of brain structure before and after. The result: no detectable structural changes. None of the grey matter increases that earlier, smaller studies had reported. Davidson himself, in an interview with the Scientist magazine, was direct about it. There was frankly a lot of hype, he said, saying that if you meditated for 8 weeks, you could change the volume of your prefrontal cortex. That is false. This is worth pausing on, because it tells us something important about what we actually know. The clinical effects appear to be real. The neuroscientific story has been overstated. The practice helps people. It does not, on the evidence we currently have, rewire them at the level of brain architecture in 8 weeks. So 2 things are true at once. Jon Kabat-Zinn built something genuinely useful for genuine suffering. The clinical evidence supports it, and he built it by consciously setting aside the parts of the original practice that were oriented not towards stress reduction, but towards something else entirely. Both of those things are true. They do not cancel each other out. What were those parts? What did he set aside? What is the practice he was drawing from in its full and original form? The Buddha called it the direct path. Chapter 2. The text we are about to look at is one of the most important documents in the Buddhist canon. It is called the Satipatthana Sutta. It is the 10th discourse of the Majjhima Nikaya, what scholars call MN10, and it begins with one of the most striking opening sentences in all of religious literature. In the translation of Thanissaro Bhikkhu, an American monk in the Thai forest tradition who has spent decades with these texts, it reads like this: "This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realization of unbinding." In other words, the 4 establishings of mindfulness. The phrase to pause on is the first one, the direct path. In Pali, ekayano mago, literally something like going one path or one direction path. For roughly 1500 years, The dominant commentarial tradition read this phrase as the only path, or the sole way, as if the Buddha were here making a strong claim that no other route to awakening exists. That reading goes back to Buddhaghosa, the great 5th century commentator, who offered 5 possible interpretations of the phrase and let the strongest of them carry the weight. Some respected teachers still translate it that way today, but when modern scholars, Analayo, Bhikkhu Bodhi, Thanissaro himself, look at how the same Pali phrase is used elsewhere in the discourses, what they find points in a different direction. In one parallel passage, the same word describes a path going to a pit. A path going to a pit is not the only path that exists. It is a path that, if you walk it, takes you straight to a particular destination. Direct in the sense of straight, not exclusive, not the only. So when we say the direct path through the rest of this discussion, that is the reading we are using. The road that runs straight to the goal, not a denial that other roads exist. What is the goal? The sentence is unusually explicit about it. The overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, the disappearance of pain and distress, the attainment of the right method, and what Thanissaro translates as the realization of unbinding, what the canon elsewhere calls nibbana, not a more pleasant life, not the management of suffering, the ending of suffering, a different relationship with everything. And the discourse closes with a guarantee. We will come back to this at the end of the chapter, but it is worth knowing now what is being promised. If a person develops these 4 foundations as the discourse describes, the result is one of 2 fruits in this very lifetime: full awakening, or the stage just before it. The timeline the Buddha gives ranges from 7 years down, and the lowest bound, given to a practitioner of fully developed faculties, is 7 days. 7 days. That is the claim the discourse is making. What is the practice then? 4 foundations of mindfulness: body, feelings, mind states, and what the texts call mental qualities or phenomena, each of them taught in the same shape, each of them carried by 3 specific qualities. Qualities that, taken together, are the difference between the original practice and what modern mindfulness has come to mean. It is to those 3 qualities that we turn first. The formula appears at the start of every section of the discourse. The practitioner, the text says, remains focused on the body, or on feelings, or on mind states, or on mental qualities, in and of themselves. And then come 3 Pali words: atap, shi, sampajano, satima, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful. Each one of them is loaded with content that the modern translation tends to flatten. Begin with atapapu. The word comes from the same root as atapa, heat. It is cognate with tapas, the ascetic fervor of the Indian renunciate tradition. To be atapas is to be ardent, to bring active, sustained, directed effort, to care that the practice succeeds. In the standard description of one who has reached the goal, what the canon calls an arahant, the same word appears in a recurring formula: atapahitato, ardent and resolute. This is worth letting register. The original practice has heat, it has agenda, it is going somewhere. The instruction is not to be passive. The instruction is to be ardent, to put effort behind the seeing. This is exactly where the modern translation departs from the source. Recall the postures of mind that the MBSR tradition teaches students to cultivate. One of them, perhaps the most famous, is non-striving. Do not try to get anywhere. Do not aim for any particular experience. Do not strive. That is not a translation of a tap. It is the opposite of a tap. It is also, again, a clinical choice, and a wise one, for the patient's MBSR was designed to serve. We have already said why. The point here is only this: When MBSR replaced ATAP with non-striving, it was not preserving the original quality of effort. It was substituting a different quality of effort, one that worked for a different goal. The original practice has an agenda. The agenda is awakening. This is not a flaw in the original practice. This is the original practice. The second quality is sampajano, clearly comprehending, or alert, or in some translations, fully aware. Where atap is the quality of effort, sampayano is the quality of knowing, but not the abstract knowing of an academic. Sampayano is the knowing of what you are doing while you are doing it and why. Within the canonical discourse, a specific subsection applies this quality to everyday actions, going forward and returning, looking ahead and looking away, bending and stretching, eating, drinking, urinating, defecating, sleeping, waking, speaking, remaining silent. Each of these activities, the text says, is to be done with clear comprehension. The clear comprehension that the original text is asking for is not just the present moment awareness that MBSR teaches. It is contextual awareness, knowing what this action is for, knowing where it fits in the larger project. The original word for that larger project is the path. The entire system of training that runs from ethical conduct through concentration to insight. To act with sampayano is to know each action in its proper place within that path. The third quality is satima, mindful. And here we meet the most disputed word in the entire vocabulary of Buddhist meditation. The word sati is what T.W. Rhys-Davids, the great Pali scholar of the late 19th century, translated as mindfulness in his 1881 rendering of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. That is the discourse on the Buddha's final days, DN 16 in the modern numbering. It was a graceful translation. It has carried for almost 150 years. It is also, on the evidence of the texts themselves, almost certainly incomplete. The Pali word sati is the noun form of a verb that means to remember. In the canon, sati is what you exercise when you keep something firmly in mind, when you do not let it slip. The classical Buddhist memory practices, anusati, recollections of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, of generosity, of one's own ethical conduct, are exercises in sati. They are not exercises in bare attention. They are exercises in active remembering. How much weight to place on this memory sense is itself debated. Of the major contemporary scholars, Thanissaro Bhikkhu places the most. He argues that the primary work of sati is to keep the right frame in mind, to remember at each moment what one is doing and what one is doing it for. Bhikkhu Bodhi, the other great living translator of the Pali Canon, retains the word mindfulness in his translations, but allows that the memory dimension is real. Bhikkhu Analayo, who has written perhaps the most comprehensive scholarly book on this discourse, holds both senses at once, bare attention and recollection, neither one quite sufficient alone. On any of these readings, one thing is clear. Sati is not just notice whatever shows up without an agenda. It is not the passive open awareness of the modern adaptation. It is, at minimum, an awareness that is holding something, a frame, a purpose, a memory of what this is for. To be satima is to remain anchored, not to drift. So these are the three qualities. Ardent, clearly comprehending. Mindful, in the older sense of holding the frame. They appear at the start of every one of the four foundations. They are the recurring formula. They are the spine of the practice. And it is under their authority that the four foundations themselves are taught. We turn now to the first. The first foundation is the body. The Pali word is kaya. The practice is called kaya-nupassana, sustained contemplation of the body. And inside this single foundation, the discourse names 6 exercises in a rough progression from gross to subtle. First, anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. The practitioner sits down in some quiet place, cross-legged, body erect, and brings sati, that anchored awareness, to the breath. Breathing in long, knowing breathing in long. Breathing in short, knowing breathing in short. Training, the text says, to breathe in calming the bodily formation. This is the entry into the practice. We will return to it. Second, postures. Whatever position the body is in, the practitioner knows the body in that position. Standing, knowing the body is standing. Walking, knowing it is walking. Sitting, knowing it is sitting. Lying down, knowing it is lying down. Third, clear comprehension of activities, the Sampajano passage we just looked at. Each ordinary action done with clear comprehension of what it is. Fourth, the body in parts. The practitioner contemplates the body as a collection of components: hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, and so on, through a list of around 31 items. The list, in its standard form, draws partly on later monastic commentary. What is canonical is the move it represents, dismantling the body as a single solid thing by attending to it as parts. Fifth, the body as elements, the same body, contemplated now as earth, water, fire, and wind, the 4 classical elements of the ancient analysis: solidity, fluidity, heat, motion. Not a person, not a self, just these 4 properties, currently arranged. And 6, what may be the most confrontational practice anywhere in the Buddhist canon: the 9 cemetery contemplations. The instruction is direct, as if a practitioner, the text says, were to see a corpse thrown aside in a charnel ground. 1 day dead, 2 days dead, 3 days dead, swollen, discolored, festering. The practitioner applies the contemplation to his very own body. This body too, the text says, is of this nature. It will become like this. It cannot escape this fate. The 9 progress through the stages of decay, the corpse becoming bones held together by sinews, the sinews gone, bones scattered in all directions, bones bleached, bones piled together, bones crumbled to dust. This practice is almost never taught in Western mindfulness settings, and for understandable reasons. It is hard, it is dark, it can be misread as morbid, but its purpose in the original system is not morbidity. Its purpose is to deliver, in the most visceral form available, the central truth of impermanence. Anicca, the body you are wearing right now, is going somewhere. Knowing that, really knowing it, not just thinking it, is supposed to change what one clings to. That is what the contemplation is for. These 6 exercises, breath, postures, sampajano, parts, elements, cemetery, are taken in the discourse under those same 3 qualities, ardently, with clear comprehension, mindfully, holding the frame. The second foundation is feelings. The Pali word is vedana, and the contemplation of feeling vedana nupassana, is, for reasons that will become clear, structurally the most important of the 4. Feeling, in the technical Buddhist sense, does not mean emotion. Anger, sadness, joy, jealousy. Those are mental states, contemplated under the 3rd foundation, not this one. Vedana is something simpler and more upstream. It is the affective tone of an experience, pleasant, painful, or neither pleasant nor painful. The neutral tone, that is it. 3 tones. And the discourse asks the practitioner to know them as they arise. When there is a pleasant feeling, to know there is a pleasant feeling. When there is a painful feeling, to know there is a painful feeling. when neither, to know neither. Then the discourse adds a refinement. Each of the 3 tones is divided again into 2 categories, what the texts call worldly and unworldly, or in the Pali, samisa and niramisa. Samisa, literally of the flesh, refers to feelings tied to the senses, to ordinary experience, to what arises from the engagement of mind with the world. Niramisa, literally not of the flesh, refers to feelings that arise from the practice itself, the pleasant feeling of a settled mind, the painful feeling of confronting one's own restlessness, the neutral feeling of deep concentration. This division matters because it tells us something important. The practice is not against pleasant feeling as such. The pleasant feeling that arises in deep meditation, what the canon calls the rapture of jhana, pati, is niramisa. It is wholesome. It is path-supporting. The practice does not want you to suppress it. The practice wants you to know it accurately. This is a niramisa pleasant feeling, not the kind that leads anywhere troublesome. The other kind. What troublesome? Here we come to the structural reason this foundation is the hinge. In a different discourse, Samyutta Nikaya 12.2, the standard statement of dependent origination, the Buddha lays out the sequence by which suffering generates itself. There are 12 links in the chain. Some of them are difficult, technical, and have generated centuries of commentary. But 3 of them, sitting in the middle, are the operational heart of the whole structure. Contact, the text says, conditions feeling, vipassanā vedana, the encounter between a sense, an object, and consciousness. That is contact. Out of contact arises feeling. Out of feeling arises craving. Tanha. Vedana pakaya tanha. 3 words. Contact, feeling, craving. And the reason this is the operational heart of suffering is that these 3 steps happen in unaware experience automatically. The eye meets a sight. The mind registers a tone. Pleasant, painful, neither. And out of that tone, before any deliberate thought has formed, the next link in the chain has already begun. A pleasant feeling has already started to become a wanting. A painful feeling has already started to become an aversion. A neutral feeling has already started to become a kind of unconscious drift. What the canon calls a latent tendency toward ignorance, if you watch this in your own experience. And the discourse is essentially asking you to do exactly that. You will find that it happens fast, faster than thought. By the time you have a sentence about the experience in your head, the craving is already underway. The story you tell yourself about your reaction is a description, mostly, of something that has already begun. Now consider where, in this sequence, an intervention can land. If you try to intervene at the level of craving, at tanha, you are already too late. The craving is already arising. The work at that point is damage control. If you try to intervene at the level of contact, at phassa, you are too early. Contact is going to happen. Your senses are open. The world is going to enter. Closing your senses is the strategy of an ascetic withdrawal, not of an awakened life in the world. There is one place where intervention is possible. One hinge. One pivot point. It is at the level of feeling, between contact and craving. At the moment, the tone has just arisen, but before craving has emerged from it. That moment exists. It is brief. It is precisely the moment that Vedananupassana, the second foundation of satipatthana, is the practice of attending to. Know the feeling clearly, pleasant, painful, neither, before it becomes a wanting. That is the instruction. Not interrupt the story, not change the thought. Catch the effective tone in the instant it arises, hold it in clear awareness, and the chain that follows from it does not run its course in the usual way. This is the move that has no real equivalent in MBSR. Modern mindfulness teaches present moment awareness of feeling. That part is preserved. What is not preserved is the explicit structural use of that awareness as the place where the chain of suffering can be interrupted. The map of contact, feeling, craving is not part of the MBSR curriculum because MBSR is not built to address the structural origin of suffering. It is built to reduce the symptoms. The original practice is doing something different. It is reaching into the place where the symptoms are made. It is worth noticing, in passing, that the centrality of Vedana has also been a major emphasis in the modern lay vipassanā tradition in the lineage of S.N. Goenka, where the practice of scanning the body for feeling tones is treated as the engine of insight. That emphasis is itself a particular reading of the canonical material. Not the only reading, but one that draws on the canon carefully. What the canon does say, with no ambiguity, is what we have already said. The second foundation is feeling. The practice is to know the feeling tone clearly, and the structural function of doing so, given the larger map of dependent origination, is the interruption of craving before it begins. The third foundation is mind states. Cittanupassana, the contemplation of citta, the heart-mind, the affective and cognitive condition of consciousness in this moment. The discourse names 16 pairs of states, asking the practitioner to know which is present. The mind with passion or without, with aversion or without, with delusion without, constricted, scattered, concentrated, not concentrated, released, not released. The contemplation here is metta, not the content of thought, but the quality of mind that the thought is happening in. Not what am I thinking, but what is the condition of the thinker. A mind tinted with aversion is going to read the world differently than a mind not so tinted. To know which mind is currently operating is to know what your reading of the moment is filtered through. This foundation is taught more briefly in the discourse than the other three. Its function in the architecture is roughly this. Once awareness has stabilized in body and feeling, the question of what mental condition is doing, the experiencing, becomes available. Before that, it is not. The fourth foundation is what the texts call dhammanupassana, the contemplation of phenomena or of mental qualities, or sometimes of the teachings themselves. The Pali word dhamma has a wide range, and in this context, it carries some of that range. What is contemplated here are 5 specific categories of phenomenon in 5 sequential subsections. First, the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, doubt. These are the conditions of mind that obstruct the practice itself, and the contemplation is simply to know when they are present, when they are not, and how they arise and pass. Second, the 5 aggregates, what the canon calls the constituents of personal experience: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. The practitioner contemplates each as it arises and passes. Third, the 6 sense bases, the meeting of each sense with its object, the contact we just looked at in the section on feeling. Fourth, what the texts call the 7 factors of awakening, the bojjhangas. We will return to these in a moment, because they have a particular role in how the whole practice operates as a system. And fifth, the 4 noble truths, the framework that opens the entire teaching. There is suffering, there is its origin, there is its ending, there is the path that leads to its ending. These 5 subsections taken together are the most analytically dense of the 4 foundations. They are also the place where the practice opens out into the larger architecture of the Dharma. Body, feeling, and mind states are taught as direct objects. Dhammanupassana is taught as the lens through which the entire teaching becomes visible in the practitioner's experience. There is one more thing in the discourse that has to be put in front of you. It is a single sentence, and it appears in the discourse not once, not twice, but 13 times. After each contemplation, after the breath, after the postures, after the clear comprehension passage, after the parts, after the elements, after the cemetery contemplations, after each section on feelings, after the meta-awareness of mind states, after each of the 5 subsections of Dhammanupassana, the same passage returns. In Thanisaro's translation, or he remains focused on the phenomenon of origination with regard to the body, or to feelings, or to mind states, or to mental qualities, on the phenomenon of passing away, on the phenomenon of origination and passing away together, or his mindfulness that there is a body, or feeling, or mind state, or mental quality, is maintained to the extent of knowledge and remembrance, and he remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Read it again, slowly. It comes in 3 movements. The first movement is about origination and passing away. Whatever you are looking at, the breath, the corpse, the pleasant feeling, the constricted mind, the hindrance of restlessness, you do not look at its content. You look at its arising. You look at its falling away. You watch process, not contents. Watching process directly is what delivers the experience of impermanence, anicca, not as a doctrine you remember, but as a fact you are currently seeing. The second movement is about knowledge and remembrance. The Pali words are jnana and patisati, recognition and recollection. The awareness is held just long enough for the seeing to be real, not philosophical, not abstract. There is a body, there is a feeling. The seeing is steady enough to be knowledge. And the third movement is the sentence we should not pass over quickly. He remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is the destination. That is what the whole practice is for. Notice what it is not. It is not he attains a peaceful state. It is not he reduces his stress. It is not he becomes happier. Those things may happen along the way, and they are not bad. They are not the point. The point is non-clinging. Anupada, release. The original word in the line, anisito, means unsustained, not leaning on, not relying. The practitioner is no longer leaning on anything in the world for the foundation of his being. This sentence appears 13 times in the discourse, not as decoration, not as poetic refrain. It appears 13 times because it is the instruction. Every specific technique in the 4 foundations, every breath, every posture, every clear comprehension of going forward and returning, every cemetery contemplation, every awareness of pleasant or painful feeling, every recognition of a constricted mind, every single one of them is doing the same underlying thing, watching arising and passing, releasing the clinging. Non-clinging is not a technique. It is what the techniques are for. If you wanted to compress the entire practice into one sentence, this is the sentence. He remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. There is one more move to make before we leave this chapter, because the architecture of the practice extends beyond the discourse we have been reading. In another important discourse, Majjhima Nikaya 118, the Anapanasati Sutta, the Buddha is recorded as saying that the simple practice of mindfulness of breathing, when developed and pursued, fulfills all 4 foundations of mindfulness. The discourse maps it out in detail. 16 steps of breath awareness. The first 4 cover the body. The next 4 cover feelings. The next 4 cover mind states. The final 4 cover mental qualities. The implication is striking. The full architecture of satipatthana, body, feelings, mind states, mental qualities, with the three qualities running through them and the refrain as their goal, can be carried by attention to the breath alone. The difference between just watching the breath, which is roughly where most modern practice settles, and the full canonical structure, is not a different technique. It is the same breath, attended to more completely. The same discourse takes one further step. The four foundations of mindfulness, when developed, fulfill what the canon calls the 7 factors of awakening, the bojjhangas. Sati itself is the first factor. From it arises investigation of phenomena. Dhammavikaya. From investigation arises energy. Virya. From energy arises rapture. Piti. From rapture arises tranquility. Passaddhi. From tranquility arises concentration. Samadhi. And from concentration, refined by sustained insight, arises equanimity. Upekkha. Sati is the seed. The whole sequence of awakening grows from it. To practice satipatthana is, in this larger architecture, to be cultivating the first factor of the awakening sequence. And through that first factor, all 7. This is what the Buddha called the direct path. Chapter 3. So what is the difference, finally, between the practice the Buddha called the direct path and the practice that 36 million American adults are doing under the name mindfulness? The architecture is similar enough that they share a name. Sit, attend to the breath, notice the body, notice what is felt, notice the condition of the mind. Both practices ask for these things. What differs is the question each practice is built to answer. Mindfulness-based stress reduction is built to address a real and widespread human problem: the experience of being subject to chronic suffering that has no clear external solution. Chronic pain, anxiety, depressive relapse, the persistent inner critic. For these, MBSR offers something that medicine alone has not always offered: a way of relating to the symptoms that loosens the grip of the symptoms. Present moment awareness, non-judgment, non-striving, daily practice. Within the registration in which it operates, it works. The clinical evidence is real. This is the question MBSR is built to answer. How do I live with this condition I cannot make go away? It is a worthy question. The clinical evidence shows that the practice helps people answer it. The question the Buddha's discourse is built to answer is different. How does this condition arise? And can it be brought to ending? Those are not the same question. And the practice that answers one is not the practice that answers the other. The 4 foundations are not a stress management tool. They are an investigation. The 3 qualities, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, are not postures of acceptance. They are the operating mode of someone who is determined to look at the structural conditions of their own experience until the chain that produces suffering becomes visible. And, having become visible, can be interrupted at the hinge. That hinge, as we have seen, is feeling. The map is contact, feeling, craving. The intervention is at the moment between feeling and craving. The result, when the practice goes the full distance the discourse claims it can go, is non-clinging. Independence from leaning on anything in the world for the foundation of one's being. The trajectory also differs. MBSR is an 8-week intervention with measurable clinical endpoints: anxiety reduction, pain management, prevention of relapse. The clinical literature can give you confidence intervals on these outcomes. The original practice does not measure itself in those units. Its outcome, in the discourse's own terms, is unbinding. Its timeline, given as a guarantee, is 7 days to 7 years. These are not comparable measures. These are not the same practices. They are not different in degree. They are different in kind. What does this look like in actual practice? A person who takes the original seriously does not stop doing the techniques MBSR teaches: the body scan, the breath, the noticing of sensations. Those are preserved in both. What changes is the orientation around them. The question shifts. Not how do I feel less stressed, but what is the structure of what I am experiencing, and where in that structure does the clinging arise? The seated time becomes investigation. The refrain, origination, passing away, non-clinging, becomes the implicit instruction inside every period of practice. The breath is still the breath. The practitioner is no longer practicing for relief. The practitioner is practicing for release. Jon Kabat-Zinn was not translating satipatthana. He was building a new tool from one of its components, and he was honest about that. He said so directly. The problem is not what he built. The problem is when, in the popular culture that grew up around what he built, the adaptation is mistaken for the original, when mindfulness comes to mean only the 8-week clinical version, when the older meaning is forgotten, not by Kabat-Zinn, who knew exactly what he had left behind, but by the much larger world that took up the word without his precision. If you have ever been told that mindfulness is the practice the Buddha taught, you have been told something true and something incomplete in the same sentence. The practice the Buddha taught contains what MBSR teaches. It also contains a great deal that MBSR, for its own good reasons, set aside. What it contains, in the sentence that the discourse repeats 13 times, is this: he remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. Read it once more. He remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. That is where the original practice is pointing, not to a calmer version of your current life, to a different relationship with everything. Close. Return for a moment to the opening sentence of the discourse, the direct path. We can now hear it more accurately. Direct, not because it is the only road, but because it goes straight. No detours into metaphysics, no waiting for certainty about the ultimate questions, no requirement that you first solve the problem of God, or of what happens after death, or of the nature of consciousness. Just this: body, feelings, mind, mental qualities. The 4 objects: ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful. The 3 qualities. And the refrain that says 13 times what you are building toward. Whether to walk that path is, of course, your decision. The point of this discussion has not been to argue that you should. Many people will find that the modern adaptation gives them what they need, and there is nothing in the canon that suggests an 8-week course in stress reduction is a bad thing. It is not. It helps people. The point has been only this: the original is also there. It has been there for 2,500 years. It has been written down. It is freely available. It has been translated multiple times by serious people. And what it offers is not a more efficient way of being in the life you are already living. It offers a different question to ask of that life, and a method with a specific timeline for finding out what the answer is. What the original asks of the practitioner is also more, and it would be dishonest not to say so. 8 weeks at 45 minutes a day is one kind of commitment. The discourse contemplates years. It contemplates a sustained orientation, a willingness to look at one's own experience without flinching, including the parts of it, the cemetery contemplations, the seeing of impermanence in one's own body, that the modern adaptation, for clinical reasons, declines to teach. None of this is hidden. The discourse is explicit about what it asks. The asking is part of the offering. The Buddha called it the direct path. The discourse closes with the same sentence it has returned to in one form or another 13 times before. He remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world,